This is one of the biggest findings that I have made as I have delayered my own symptoms and as I have also helped support women in understanding and resolving the deeper roots of what it is that their bodies are expressing. And so, in this video, I want to share how this works, how to identify if this is a relevant factor for you, and how you can start to work with these underlying dynamics so that you can start to create real transformation from the inside out. So, you might be listening to this thinking, how on earth could anger be related to inflammation and the symptoms that I'm experiencing? I am not an angry person. I 100% understand this because it actually took me years within my own healing journey to actually start to see these patterns within myself. So, I'm going to share how this emerged for me so that you can get an idea of how this actually works. If we rewind back to 2020, when I had had the most significant flare of my entire life, this was the last flare I ever had. I was hospitalized for several weeks. I was in a very rough spot where medical interventions were not pulling me out of the flare, and I was fearing for my life. Finally, I reached a point where I was stable enough to go home, but I was still going for weekly blood work to monitor my state and my progress. And it was during this time where I was experiencing such profound fear and anxiety over my health to the point that it was overwhelming and actually impacting my ability to take care of my two young children. So, this finally opened me to receiving support in navigating my emotions. And after seeing several different practitioners, I finally found one that actually created a real shift. Because instead of talking about what I had been through and what I was feeling on a mental, intellectual level, she actually invited me into my body where I felt the visceral sensations beneath the anxiety and beneath the fear. I could feel the heaviness on my chest. I could feel the very visceral contraction in my abdomen. And it was in this experience where I understood firsthand that my body was carrying this vast emotional load that I previously had no idea about. So I started to delayer and understand that I was operating with certain beliefs and in certain patterns for much of my life that actually informed my decisions and choices and how I actually showed up within my relationships and my work that I previously didn't realize because I had identified with them. And during this time, my kids were quite young. My son was about 2, my daughter was about 3.5. And at this age, kids are often going through this developmental phase where they are really asserting their independence and testing boundaries. And so, my daughter in particular was having these very fiery emotional outbursts, and she was very strong willed in expressing what it was that she needed and wanted. She was being very, very demanding. And I found that when she was having these emotional reactions, I would have these visceral reactions in my own body where it almost felt like I wanted to jump out of my skin. Like I could not maintain my cool or my ground, and I felt very triggered and reactive myself. And so when I actually leaned into exploring that feeling within my body, what I realized is that her fiery emotions, her anger, her expression of her needs and desires was so triggering to me because I had learned to repress my own anger. And because of that, I had lost connection to my own needs, my own ability to hold boundaries. And she was bumping up against that. And I started to realize how this impacted me in terms of all the ways that I often overextended and overgave at the expense of my own well being. All of the ways that I often said yes when what I really needed to say was no to actually take care of myself. But because I had lost access to my anger, I had also lost access to my no. Because anger is the emotion that arises to actually inform us of how we feel in relation to a given circumstance. So when anger arises, it's often to inform us of what it is that matters to us and to protect what matters to us. So anger is the emotion that comes up when there is a need that hasn't been met or when there is a boundary that needs to be drawn in order to either protect ourselves or to protect something or someone that matters to us. So that anger connects us with our power, with our determination, with our clarity, so that we can actually catalyze change and influence the external environment based on what it is that we need. So when anger is repressed or when we lose access to anger, this typically has two effects. The first is that we lose access to our no, which means that we often have a difficulty in drawing and holding boundaries. This can translate into a difficulty separating our feelings from others' feelings or our needs from others' needs, which often looks like feeling responsible for or caretaking or managing others' emotions, and even overgiving, overextending ourselves at the expense of our own feelings and needs. So, this can look like feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, feeling like there is way too much on your plate, and at the same time, feeling resentful that you are not being met or supported yourself. The second piece is that because anger is an emotion that actually connects us with our sense of strength, power, and determination to actually influence the external environment, when we lose access to that, what happens is that it can actually turn inwards as self criticism or as attempts to change internally instead. So, this is often highly linked to the concept of the inner critic and the voice of the shoulds. So, instead of actually taking up space and speaking our needs or feelings into the space, what can happen is we can should ourselves instead. I shouldn't be saying that. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm too much. I'm not enough. Something's wrong with me, instead of there's something that needs to be changed externally. And both of these facets create a pretty significant source of stress that is often overlooked, but that I see as contributing to the stress that we associate with autoimmune flares. So let's talk about why someone would have a repressed relationship with anger or lose access to anger. There are three common ways that I see. And the first is that it was either shamed or punished or not safe to express growing up, so we repress it. This often happens through very human happenings where, as young children, we are expressing anger, often in a very primal way, by stomping our feet, kicking, screaming, thrashing, throwing, hitting. And instead of the emotion being separated from the behavior, they are lumped together and we are either shamed or punished, or there is some sort of lost connection as a result of that. Now, because we are inherently wired to maintain connection with our caregivers so that we can be safe and secure and so that we can get our needs met, when something threatens that connection, over time, what can happen is that we can start to see that expression as a threat. So, in this case, when anger threatens connection with our parents or caregivers, over time, that anger can be registered as a threat within our system. We can start to believe that that anger is bad or harmful or unsafe, and we can start to repress and even disconnect from it. The second way that we tend to repress anger is very similar to the first, except instead of us being the one who's expressing the anger and being shut down in it, perhaps there was a caregiver or sibling or someone within our life who actually expressed anger or aggression reactively toward us. So, in those cases, it can feel very threatening. And instead of understanding that that is an unhealthy expression of anger, we can see anger as a threat in and of itself, and we can start to become averse to it or actually shut it down. And the third way that anger can become repressed or that we can start to lose access to it is if there was a larger experience within our earlier life where we weren't actually able to enforce our no or protect ourselves when there was something happening to us. So, this can be the case where there is abuse or an attack or assault or some other bigger T event like that. And instead of being able to say no and protect ourselves and have that be honored, that wasn't possible. And so what happens is instead there is a shutdown or freeze response in order to endure the situation. And oftentimes that anger and our access to it gets shut down in the same process. In all of these circumstances, when we lose access to that anger, not only do we lose access to our no, to the feedback contained within that anger around our needs, around our desires, around what matters to us, and around our boundaries, but that anger doesn't just disappear. It is actually held within our system and within our body, within our cells, tissues, and organs until we actually develop the capacity or create space to remain present while it completes its cycle. And if you think about the energy of anger, it is hot, it is fiery. You could even consider it to be inflammatory in its more reactive or aggressive forms. And this is very similar to the words that women often use to describe the feeling of the inflammation within their bodies. And to build on this, consider what would happen if you were boiling water in a kettle and did not have a pathway to actually allow that steam to be discharged. So, as the kettle heated up, steam would start to be created. And if there wasn't an outlet or pathway for it, what would happen is that would create a lot of pressure and tension inside that kettle. And it would actually be quite hard on the vessel itself, which is very similar to what happens within our system and within our body when anger doesn't have a pathway to actually move through us. So, not only does the repression of anger in and of itself actually create tension and stress within our systems and bodies, which is often a large contributor to the stress that is associated with autoimmune flares, but the patterns that emerge as a result of overgiving, overextending at the expense of self actually create additional stress in our lives as well. So for me, I had no idea that I was repressing anger, let alone repressing emotion in general. But what I did know is that I often felt overwhelmed, like there was too much on my plate, and resentful for the amount of things that I was carrying without being supported myself. I just didn't understand that there were certain beliefs and patterns and imprints that existed within me that were actually shaping my choices, decisions, experiences, and because of that, my experience of stress and what was actually going on within my body. And this has very much shaped how I relate to symptoms and expressions from my body. Because where I once believed that my body was faulty and failing me and attacking itself, I can now see was my body actually communicating and signaling me to get my attention around these patterns that I was operating within that were not actually serving my well being. And when I actually look back, what I can see is that before my symptoms got really loud, there were often quieter symptoms, either within my body, quieter signals such as even tiredness, or there were symptoms within my life, such as more subtle feelings that things didn't feel quite right, that I often overrode in the moment until they got so loud that I could not override them anymore. So, if this is resonating with you, there are a few ways that you can start to work with this dynamic to actually create transformation from the inside out. My first suggestion is to actually practice the pause. So, when somebody asks something of you or before you commit to something, pause. Even if it's just for 10 minutes, even if it's just for a couple of hours, to actually consider if this is in alignment with your greater needs and if you actually have true capacity to commit. So, this might look like pausing before you reply to a text message, or if you are on the phone or in person with someone, just saying, I'll check my calendar and get back to you on that, or let me sit with that for X number of hours or days and I'll get back to you on that. And actually taking a moment to check in with yourself first. This part might not necessarily be uncomfortable, although it is different than what you are used to. But if you're anything like me or the women that I support, when it actually comes time to decline something that someone has asked of you, or to take something off your plate, or to ask someone for support for something, this is often more uncomfortable because it often bumps up against the very beliefs, imprints, and the emotions that you would typically avoid by saying yes. So, this can take some practice and it seems quite small, but it's actually significant. And I know many of the women that I have supported along in their journeys notice that their symptoms used to be an excuse for them to say no, to avoid the discomfort of saying no without any other valid excuse. So, oftentimes with symptoms, our bodies say no for us in all of the ways that we aren't aware that we need to or can't in the moment. I know this has been the case with me. So, for something that seems so small, it can actually be quite significant. The other way that you can actually explore this pattern more deeply is by using the free guided rooting practice that I have linked below. And this is essentially a 20-minute process that gently opens the lines of communication within your body and guides you into exploring and discerning whether there are deeper energetic layers present for you. So you can use this in the traditional sense that it was actually designed for, or you can actually take in a certain circumstance where you said yes instead of no, or you felt resentful around something that you had to do, into your practice and explore what actually emerges through that lens. So, to bring all of this back home, what I have discovered is that there are many different types of deeper emotional, mental, energetic, and nervous system layers present beneath autoimmune symptoms. This is simply one. And while we may have believed at one point that our bodies are attacking themselves, what I have come to understand is that our bodies are always signaling and communicating with us, not because they are broken, but because they're inviting us into deeper levels of awareness and transformation around these aspects of our conditioning that are no longer in alignment with our truth. And if you'd like to go deeper on this, this is exactly what we explore inside my signature immersion, Rooted, which is designed specifically for mothers navigating autoimmune and similar systemic symptoms, such as with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, to not only understand and address the deeper layers present beneath the symptoms that they experience, but also to equip yourself with an integrated roadmap to continue addressing and delayering the symptoms and expressions from your body going forward. I am currently accepting applications for the next intake, and you can find details in the links below if you'd like to check it out and apply. Thank you so much for listening. I invite you to subscribe to receive more of these videos, to leave me a comment below with what resonated with you, or if you have any questions that emerged through this process, and I will see you next time.